You're listening to ShipFam. Today, Luke and I interview Dmitry Zhifarsky, the maintainer of Dart Code Metrics, a premium static analyzer for Dart and Flutter projects. We discuss the challenges of making a living off client-side software and the downsides to open source. You can find Dmitry's Twitter handle in the show notes, along with a link to Dart Code Metrics' website.
So, to end the pod, we have Dmitry. He is working on Dart Code Metrics. And actually, I have a quick question right out of the gate. Dmitry, is it just you or are there other people on the team for Dart Code Metrics?
It's somewhat a complicated question because I think in official manner, it's only me. I'm like one man team, but I actually reach out to different like friends who can help me with some parts of giving advice or like, for example, I hired a designer for the first version of DCM website. So the first version of the website was made by the designer, and like I had a friend who helped me with setting up Facebook analytics for Facebook ads, for example. But overall, like day to day, it's like me alone doing everything from like customer support, marketing, sales, accounting, development, etc. It's all me. Yeah.
That's impressive. So that's a lot.
You're wearing the like dozen hats of a solopreneur, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's like everything is up to me, you know. Very, very different tasks, very different jobs to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm just curious, why did you decide to start DCM?
I always had this idea that I need to try it to make. So I will step back a little bit. DCM was initially created as a like side project at Trike when I and another person who started the project work at Trike. So and belonged initially to Trike, but the Trike is the company that has I think still has a lot of Dart Angular code, and when we both were leaving, the trend was that the code base, the front end app, was slowly replaced by React, which I think is a good thing. But overall, Dart was becoming not the main technology for the company, and the overall future of the project was kind of unknown. So I decided to kind of take it with us because the person who started it left like a month before me, and when I was leaving, I was like, okay, I think this project is actually more than just a side project of a company. We need to try to make it even better, and maybe more people will find it useful. So I decided to take it with us leaving. And actually, this process took some time, some effort from my side, because companies are not really like, how do you take a project from the company ownership and like to a individual ownership? You file a request to security, then to your front-end director, then again to security. And it was like a long process of discussing how to do that. And they did it, and we took it away, and then continued to develop it as a like separate standalone thing. So, and at this point, I had this idea that this project actually is not a typical library that you kind of find on GitHub, because the opportunity to you can make it better in so many ways. DCM is kind of a different thing because there are a lot of areas where you can improve, help people with. And so the idea that it can be a product, I had it, and I thought that, okay, if I had an opportunity, I will try to make it a product. So I quit my job. I was fortunate to quit my job and said, okay, if it's now or never. I think Flutter has a great future. Flutter constantly growing, covers more platforms, more people gets involved, etc. So I think Flutter has a great future. Let's try to build a tool that helps Flutter developers get even better experience from the framework, from the ecosystem, from the day-to-day work, and to help them build greater things.
Yeah, that's awesome. We were using you guys at Tonal, and actually Casey just tried it out. Because Casey, you were familiar with it before, but you actually like bought a license right before this call to try it out and get some seat time with it, right?
Yep. So I think this, Dmitry, might be your lowest ROI sales call. Is through this whole podcast interview process, you landed a customer. And I started with, I better play around with this just so that I can talk about it intelligently in the interview. But honestly, I just tweeted out, I don't know if you saw it yet, but I'm super happy with it. Just like my My really early first onboarding step went really well. To be honest, there's a little bit of hiccups getting it going, but I already, just for the audience to let them know, I took a 27K line Flutter app and I removed just over 2,000 lines of code just using the unused code lints. And then on top of that, I caught at least 4 to 5 mild bugs. Like I had a system for logging every button press, and I log it to Firebase and to Posthog. I discovered I was only logging it to Firebase, and I've been confused for a good couple weeks as to why the heck my Posthog analytics were so off. So already it's caught several bugs, which has been really awesome, and I'm just scratching the surface.
A small comment from me, we usually get this like question, why, so what's different between the unused code that you provide, the unused code check you provide, and the built-in VS Code or IntelliJ? So the main difference is, yes, IntelliJ, at least as I understand, and VS Code provide the private thing, and people then say, well, why should we care about the unused public code? Because the compiler will like throw it away. First, as you mentioned, I think it's very important that not all unused code is actually intentionally unused. It's a very important idea that some unused code may be just mistakenly unused. And second, idea that a compiler is not that smart, and some things that you expect it to throw away, it won't, because it is, for example, it's in a list or used in a very specific way that compiler will just keep, and our tool is capable of finding and actually suggesting you to, hey, this is unused, please remove it, you don't need it. So yeah, I'm actually really happy that you kind of tried it yourself, and even like I think you just bought it like a few hours ago, and in a few hours you got like, you saw the value yourself. Yeah, it's great.
Yep. Time to value is super quick.
Yeah, you got what, like a 10%, 9% reduction in code just from running it the first time?
Yeah, it's actually a huge number.
Yeah. And that's a solo project too, Casey. Like, you know what everything is, right? If you're working on a team, like that number could be much higher.
Yep. So of course, it's a bit of a different. I'm not quite the target customer, but still seeing a lot of value out of it. And I can't imagine how much unused code there is in, say, a 2 to 3 year old enterprise app that hasn't had DCM in it from the start. That's got to be some pretty terrifying PRs when you first merge, just getting rid of massive chunks of code. Or maybe terrifying is the wrong word. It's more relieving. Yeah,
relieving for sure. I remember originally, Dmitry, there was an issue with the Dart team where we were essentially asking, I say we meaning the community, was essentially asking them to have an unused code lint. And their answer was so mind-boggling to me. They essentially said something along the lines of, everything in Dart is a package, so any package can be consumed by like an external package. So we have no way of knowing like that this code will not be consumed by an external package. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, why can't we just mark it in pubspec.yaml that this is like a leaf package, that nothing is going to consume it, and then anything that's unused can just be marked so we can remove it. And then I feel like you came in like Batman and just like fixed the problem. You like swooped in out of nowhere and just like fixed the problem for everybody. Like, that's been basically the bulk of my experience with your project, is that there will be something that the Dart team is just not interested in tackling, and then you tackle it and charge like a reasonable fee, and it's like totally worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I actually remember how the unused code check was initially introduced, because Luke asked on Twitter, I think, and I had an idea how to implement it for some time, but the check was not implemented. And when Luke asked, I was like, okay, it's time to do that. And I think I spent like, for the very first version, I spent like 2 days or something just implementing it. And that version only supported the like top level declarations, classes, mixins, extensions, etc. But the current version that DCM has supports like fields, constructors, methods, etc. It's more advanced check. But yeah, the initial implementation was really fast and easy to add. Yeah. And the point about that there are external packages, internal packages, that's true. But again, when you talk about an app, usually the developers that work on this app, they understand what's external, what's internal, and they can make a decision what they want to keep or what they want to remove. But it's their decision, not to my decision as a tool maker that say, hey, remove this or else, right? It's just, hey, this is unused, what to do with it, it's totally your decision.
I'm wondering what your relationship has been like with the Flutter team so far. Has there been any interaction between you guys, or really not much to speak of?
That's a very good question because I think I have more interaction with the Dart team than the Flutter team. I think the Flutter actually sometimes I get this feeling that Flutter team is not really like interested or aware actually about regarding the tool, because I can for sure tell that we had a lot of interaction with the Dart team when DCM was a plugin because we used the API. And actually, I think one of the reasons the plugins API stayed, the Google team said this themselves, that DCM was the reason the plugins API stayed. So all these kind of new versions of new packages that use the plugins API, for example, custom lint and other, they all can use this API only because at some point we added DCM and Google was like, okay, we have a customer for our APIs that we wanted to deprecate, so we are keeping that API, and now it's used by other packages. So it's kind of, life is kind of very mysterious in some mysterious, works in some mysterious ways, you know? Yeah, and DCM is no longer a plugin, so yeah. But I still try to submit all like issues and bugs that I encounter with the overall with LSP, with the analyzer, so to help the team, because I know that they're a small team and there are a lot of work.
Have you ever tried running DCM on parts of the framework code base itself to see if you can catch any low-hanging fruit to improve the framework? I'm really curious how they respond if you spam them with like 10 high-quality PRs saying, this is junk, you got to get rid of it, it's unused, and so on.
We didn't actually haven't tried to run the use code check, but back in the days when DCM was an open source project, actively developed open source project, we ran several new rules, and we usually spot, like, I think even there are closed merged pull requests from these attempts, and there usually was something that was actually not. I think I'm trying to remember whether there were like bugs or just style issues, but I think there also were bugs as well. So yeah, and we tried it only for a few rules. So I think if you take the whole rule set of the current version DCM, which has I think 290 rules, and most of them are not you cannot find them in the standard analysis. They are unique to some degree, unique to Flutter ecosystem, not that unique to overall like different ecosystems, different lint rules from different ecosystems. And if you take them and run against the Flutter codebase, I'm sure you'll find a lot of things. I'm sure. And if you add the unused code check, unused files check, unnecessary nullable checks and other checks, I think there will be plenty of things. Yeah. I think I need just to add it to backlog and do it someday, just to show people that, hey, that's how static analysis works.
I feel like it'd be great marketing to potential customers and just to maybe hopefully get you on Flutter's radar a little better. I'd love to see Flutter kind of, at the very least, acknowledge you guys.
To be honest, I think I remembered we had one interaction with Hixie. Hixie acknowledged the existence of our tool and said that it's nice, but because Flutter has a very, I'll not say strange, but a specific approach to package management. All packages are limited, they are pinned, etc. They cannot take an external dependency like Dart Code Metrics as it was a plugin, and now as it's a paid version, they cannot take it because it's a paid version. So no matter what happens to the tool, they cannot take it. They cannot use it. So yeah, that Hixie acknowledged. And to be honest, I have a lot of other things to do. As I mentioned before, I have a lot of roles and hats to wear, and like throwing away hours of like time into like not interested type of state, I'm just not really interested myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the exact same position. I think I have a graveyard of 3 to 4 half-completed pull requests against Flutter right now that have just gotten lost in a sea of totally reasonable but nonetheless slow back and forth with the Flutter team. So I know where you're coming from there.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that before. I've tried to do a few PRs in the past, and I just decided it wasn't worth my time just because of the way the project is run. That said, I did see the other day that I think Flutter was like the 3rd most contributed to project on GitHub last year out of all projects on GitHub, which I thought was pretty awesome. But I had some questions for you, Dmitry, because one thing that's super interesting to me about Dart Code Metrics is that you guys started as an open source project and then you switched to closed source. And since you had experience doing like an open source driven business, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on the process or if you wanted to kind of run us through Like what led to your decisions and changes there?
I mean, you mean what was the why we decided to go from open source to closed source, or?
Yeah, so that's one thing, and then the other thing too is just your general take on open source driven businesses, because I know that there's, like, for example, there's things like Supabase. There's a lot of projects now that are for profit, but the bulk of their code is all open source and they're able to make it work. And I was just curious if you had any takes on that model just generally as well.
Okay, yeah, I think it's also. So I'll start that. I think there are different projects, and for different for some of them, the open source model can work, and for others, it just might not work at all, unless you really believe in that people or big organizations won't like take your code at their will. Because when we talk about the big corporations, they probably have some policies that they cannot just copy the code because they might face some legal consequences for that, right? But if your tool is a very niche tool, and your main audience are small teams, for example, they might not be that aware of any potential legal problems or not really care about them, and they will just copy the code without any hesitation. So, and that is a critical limitation for projects like DCM that are client-side only. So if you're talking about the backend as a service, where you open source like only a part of your product and another part is just closed source backend part, and you say that your tool is open source, it is partially open source, but not really. Let's start with that. So if your tool is not fully open source and you call it open source, it's a bit unfair to call it that way. But again, I think for backend and services, it's a little bit easier when you have the backend part not open source, for example. But it kind of shifts people's perspective really heavily. They think that open source is good and not open source is bad. And in reality, it's more than that. Let's say that. Because, for example, big companies use open source as a promotion model. With Flutter, they release a huge framework and they kind of promote their company as developer friendly, or they use the tool to sell other tools like Firebase or something like that. They use open source as a mechanism to sell other products or like do a PR when PR campaign, like generally building good view of their company. When you talk about individual developers, they don't have resources. They usually work on their projects in like free time, weekends. They're sacrificing time with their family to just build the thing they want to build. And this is a very different type of open source. It's not the same as Flutter. And when people throw at you things like, I expected that you will support DCM like longer. I mean, come on, where your expectations are coming from. We are, as for individual maintainers and people who use their work, they kind of all on the same level of.
I'm curious, did you get a bunch of pushback when you first moved to closed source and a paid project? And I was wondering how you handled it.
I think so. I started the Teams version 6 months prior to the deprecation of the open source version, and actually took this time to just understand whether the open source project and the closed source can coexist together. Like the free version will exist and the paid version will exist, but with time coming, and I'm actually again bootstrapping the company basically with no external money, with just my money I saved from before starting the thing. I started to understand that if I keep these two versions and I will continue to put in effort into open source version, being like so a dev, I will probably end up losing both tools because I won't have any resources to continue. So this 6 months gave me this perspective, and then I just wrote an article. I think it's still available on our site that we are deprecating the free version, and I tried to explain like clearly the intention and why we're doing that and what's next, right? And actually, I got a lot of good, positive feedback from people. They were very understanding of the situation. Hey, we think this project is really important, and we are happy that you're taking it at least the way it can continue to exist and to evolve. I think if there were more people who contributed to it and continued to work on it, I would maybe even just stepped up and move to do something else. But seeing that and understanding that there is more potential to the project, I just decided to do that to deprecate the free version and to move to develop the paid version in the first place. I will also say that some people tried to fork the free version and change the name of it without changing anything else. There are two projects like that. That really also made me kind of salty about the open source thing, because I understand when people copy your work and improve it. That's at least I can understand. But when they fork, change the name, and keep everything as is, and also don't respond to like issues, to their issues, and not try to make the thing better.
I have a question about that. Do you think that the people who forked it, do you think they gained anything from it? And also, do you think it hurt Dart code metrics when they did that?
I don't think it hurt. It kind of hurt the project overall. I think they did it. I actually don't know why they did it. Let's be honest. And maybe they thought about that when they fork, they will attract people who will help build their version into something better. I'm saying that explicitly that I don't know, because the free version is the open source. Let's go open source version is still available. You still can access it. You can install it from pub, etc. So it's freely available, and forking and doing nothing just, for me, makes no sense. You can just not do that and still use the old version and be happy. Forking and doing nothing, and no, I think it didn't hurt. I will say also why it didn't hurt, because the current focus of DCM is teams, because I actually believe that linters are a tool for a team, not for individuals. In general, there are some exceptions to that rule of mine, but I think it's mostly for teams, because teams need this consistency and less argument about the code style, and more like being sure about the quality of what they do than individual developers. So I think those forks actually attracted more individual developers, and if they attracted more individual developers, it simply means that they attracted the audience I'm not targeting, and that's actually not hurting anyhow the project itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing, I'm really fascinated by these open source driven businesses, but I have a really hard time like making it make sense in my head. But one thing that I will say is I've always been concerned about the situation where somebody forks your code base and then creates their own version, like you experienced with DCM. But I've also believed that there's like an authenticity factor here, where I think that people always want to use the version that's like more authentic, which to me is like Dart Code Metrics is the more authentic project in that scenario. And so I do believe that helps like carry things through if people are forking your stuff. What do you think of that concept?
I think nobody cares more about the project than the initial author, the visionary who set the initial idea. All other forks will be just a shadow copy, I don't know. And without a vision, projects on the long run just die. That's how it usually works. But also, if you compare the open source version and the current version, I think all DCM releases are public on the website, and it's changed and has changed so much. You would probably not even recognize that it's like the same thing, because it has so many things improved, so many things better. The unused code thing that Casey mentioned before, it's not available in the open source version, because actually the unused code that available in the individuals version is the IDE integration. The tool is very different. It's so much better, and even if people still want to use the free version, with each release, it will get more outdated. Let's just say that.
Casey, I wanted to ask about offer. Do you have anything you want to talk about before then?
That was the thing I was going to get to too, so go ahead and get into it.
Cool. So I was wondering if you could walk me through the offering that you have. I see that you have like a Teams version, and then you have some other tiers as well. Can you just kind of walk me through how you thought about that?
The initial idea behind the tiers?
Yeah, just your pricing and tiers and what your offering is.
Yeah. So the initial idea behind, so first there are only two options: the Teams version and the Enterprise version. But when I first released it was in January 2023. I released the website. It had only two versions: Teams version and the Enterprise version. And the Teams version had like minimum 10 seats, I think. And the price was, I think it was 18 USD for US dollars for months per seat. And now it's cheaper for the yearly option. I tried to look into other tools that developers buy. For example, people pay for GitHub, people pay for Copilot, people pay for some other thing I don't even remember that they looked into. And then I kind of try to understand what's the best price is. And the first attempt was wrong. DCM was not bringing any money first 6 months. That's like, to be clear, nothing. Like I worked day by day without weekends, etc., on a tool that was bringing nothing for 6 months. And then during this period, I talked to a lot of customers, potential customers, users who were still using the free version, to get their perspective on the best possible tiers, team, like seat, number of seats, and price. And after several conversations, I reduced the number of seats from 10 to 5, reduced the price to 14 from 18, and later, when announced the deprecation of the free version, also added the individuals plan. But it's also important to mention that the individuals version doesn't have some features that the team's version has. For example, it doesn't have the unused code from CLI, DCM fix, and nullable metrics, and a lot of other features.
To give some background, a friend of mine just yesterday was telling me that he was trying out DCM for his team, and of course he bought the individual license just to play around with it. And only after buying the license and playing with it for a while did he realize that a lot of the features he was excited to try out for his team were locked behind the 5-seat minimum team pricing. So that's a lot of backstory, but where I'm going with it is I'm wondering if you've considered changing the model so it's something like 2 different tiers of product, and then as many or as few seats as you want, and then maybe you get a bulk discount the more seats you go with, or just really any kind of format that allows an individual person to test a lot of the more high-powered features, stuff like generating code analytics reports. Mm-hmm.
So the problem is with the tools like DCM, or actually any client-side tools, that I would like people not to abuse the pricing model as much as it can be done. Because, for example, even let's say I allow 1 seat option, today, right now. What ends up happening that bigger customers with bigger teams might decide that, okay, let's buy 1 seat to 1 engineer in our whole team, and they will analyze our code. So this sounds great for the company and not that great for me, because again, the tool requires a lot of work, and if everyone just buys 1 seat, that won't be sustainable, unfortunately. So I'm trying to find a balance between the tool being accessible for smaller teams and the pricing model not being abused by bigger teams, because that's just gets against the whole idea of building a business. I think if you just give away for free everything you have, it's not a business. It
feels to me like there's this tension between wanting to be able to give everybody access to all of the features for like an individual, let's say, but also not allowing them to just set up CI and then have like 100 engineers like behind that pipeline, basically. Yeah. And that's really, really tough. And I don't have a solution for that. What I have seen in the past is I have seen per seat licenses, and then CI keys are purchased separately. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that's a solution to that problem. But I do know that you and I have had a conversation before where I said that I'm an individual and I want to be able to run this on CI/CD. And that's a situation that I don't know how common it is, but it'd be nice if there was a solution for folks around that story.
I have had several requests about the same. I think that it's not very common, like that the people need the single seat and the CI key. But we also need to keep in mind that Flutter has a lot of like freelance developers, and freelancers usually are like a solo devs, and they are the best candidate for the single seat and the CI key type of solution. So I actually had several requests. I have no solution at this time, because again, with freelancers, it gets even trickier, because if they get onboarded into somebody else's project, they add DCM to that, and then they leave and keep the key. there, the key is available now to their customer. That is not also a good thing for me, because again, I don't like limitations on these things. I don't want to track how people use the keys. I don't want to integrate the thing that they will need, for example, add. This can be solved easily. For example, there is an admin panel where people need to list all their GitHub projects, and they should be like from one organization, etc.
I'm curious, it sounds like there's a big challenge here managing a strictly client-side project and still charging for it. Would you be open? It's such a crazy hypothetical, but something like Google buying you out, merging you with the Dart team, and then they would take it free again. But at that point, the entire thing is funded by Google, so it no longer has to go through these different challenges of charging a fair price for a client-only project.
That's somewhat a complex question. I will try to break it down. I think the beauty of DCM is actually not being dependent on Google processes, not being dependent on this idea of everybody should say their word about the idea, and if at least one person is against it, let's not implement it. Plus, Google has their own expectations about the release processes. So I'm releasing it each month with a lot of changes, features. Some of them are breaking, some of them are like completely changing the idea, adding new features with I understanding that there probably are false positives and people will report them back to me, and then they will get fixed. With DCM in Google, that won't work. At least if they won't give an option to run it as a startup, basically, because this is the idea. Basically, same as a startup and fast evolving, fast moving, right? With Google, that won't work. At least how I see it. With Google, it will become again slow, and I don't know what happens. And if let's say a merge occurs, and I got a manager that is not very fan of me, and they make me quit, right? Eventually, like intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know. Then the project basically is in Google's possession, but loses their visionary, and I don't know what happens with it. Maybe it just dies.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, especially, unfortunately, with Google's reputation, people are especially scared with them in terms of moving on from a project.
Yeah. Dmitry, I know that when you first came on, you said you didn't want to talk about numbers, and I respect that. But there's this concept in the solopreneur space called ramen profitable. So I'm just curious, how close to ramen profitable is DCM at this point?
Yeah, actually, that is very easy to answer. I think I posted on Twitter. We became Indiepreneurs call it ramen profitability, right? And startups in general call it default alive when you cover your costs with what you get. Like you get to basically to zero. And I posted it on Twitter, and we crossed this mark in September last year. DCM became the default live product. So right now, and the number of customers keeps growing. Thankfully, the teams are more. So the individual developers, people who buy the individual subscription don't see that much value, and they usually leave after 1 month or 2. Some of them stay, but majority leave. That's, I think, as I mentioned before, not the main audience, and therefore I'm not really interested in fixing that, at least at this moment. The teams, on the other hand, they stay, even though the half of the teams at DCM that use DCM right now, they use the monthly subscription, and they are very positive about the tool helping them. So even when they have the opportunity to just basically leave at any time, they stay. So it's a good sign, I think. And again, we crossed the default live in September, and I am constantly growing. I hope that it continues that way, but we'll see, I guess.
That's awesome, man. Not a lot of people can claim ramen profitable on something that they started as a side project. So congrats to you on that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say, I think it involves a lot of luck, because DCM is my first open source project and my first business ever. I don't know sometimes what I'm doing at all. I'm just try different things, try different hypotheses, see what works, and keep what works and throw away what doesn't, and just iterate. It requires a lot of, you need the experience. some people need the experience to get started, and other people need to start to get experience. So business is usually the second thing. You need just to start, to try, and then you'll get more understanding of what to do, what don't do, and how it should be changed, etc. I don't know what I'm doing sometimes, so it's totally normal, and you just need to, for anyone who's building their own thing or wants to build their own thing, just try, and you'll get experience from what you try to do, and it will help you kind of move forward. The important is to take action and to try. Without that, you won't get anywhere.
Build a thing, release a thing. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So normally we give people an opportunity to plug what they're working on. I think it's fair to say that we can plug Dart Code Metrics, right? Casey tried it, and within 15 minutes, he had a 10% code reduction in a solo code base, which is like pretty amazing. I've used it, in a professional setting with a team, and it, moved mountains for us. So I definitely feel comfortable plugging it. Is there anything specific you want to promote, Dmitry, other than that?
Let me think. No, I think no, I don't. No, nothing changes. I mean, I didn't expect that question.
No
at
worries.
all. I'm
All
just
good.
like, what the? I think I'm nothing actually. Nothing. Yeah, nothing. I think we covered the tool, and that's great.
Cool. And then one thing we always like to ask people is there anyone you want to nominate to come on the podcast? Usually we ask for people who are building something in public.
I think you need to talk with Sebastian, who's building the habit tracker.
I think that's 3 for 3.
Yeah, and he came to mind because I think he's the I'm thinking about as a product. I think about your podcast as a product, and you build your podcast is, I think the target audience is Flutter developers and indie entrepreneurs, and Sebastian is a great mix of both. So it's like the ideal fit. I think that you need to try to have him and to ask about his process and ask him questions. I think it's a great candidate.
Yeah, we definitely really want to get him on. We've had 3 people ask for him to come on, so I think it's time for us to reach out to him.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for coming on the show, Dmitry. We really appreciated it.
Thank you for having me. It was great discussing DCM and open source and business in general. I hope at least to some people it will be helpful, useful, and they maybe think on taking action themselves, because again, build, ship, repeat, and do it forever.